Good day, everyone. This is our group's Nomological Framework, a project for a psychological assessment class. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the pioneers of this framework: Alico Jilliane Marie, Gotardo Margaret Ann, Ligaray Angelique, Pepito Rica Mae, and Chantal Florence. This nomological framework talks about the variables that might affect the test scores of the students. In the Philippine setting, test scores are very important in order to get into the university and get a good grade. Test scores provide universities with a common standard by which to evaluate the achievement of the students. Thus, the group decided to create this test to know if the pandemic, specifically the online class setting, affects the learnings of the students. This would also evaluate the variables that might affect the students' test scores, especially in this online learning. Before we delve into the related variables, let us talk about our main variable first, which is test score. Test score, by definition, is a piece of information, usually a number, that conveys the performance of an examinee on a test. One formal definition is that it is a summary of the evidence contained in an examinee's responses to the items of a test that are related to the construct or constructs being measured. Moreover, in an online class setting, just like face-to-face, taking tests is still one of the class's features. Tests in online classes are conducted through platforms such as quizzes, Kahoot, Canvas, Google Forms, and many more. However, despite taking a test and learning in the comforts of our home, test scores are still affected by various variables, resulting in either having a high or low score.
Aside from the main variable, which is the student's test scores during online class, we have also discovered 13 sub-variables that may be related or may affect our main variable. These are hours of studying, hours of sleep, class types, levels of readiness, types of environment, types of pressure, hours of free time, number of assignments, temperature of the room, number of gadgets available, duration of COVID-19 pandemic, type of internet service provider, and affects, which is mostly focused on the mental health of students. Let us go through the definitions of each subvariable one at a time. The first subvariable, which is hours of studying, measures how long a student studies. So, the time interval is his focus, like 1 to 3 hours or more. Next, we have the second subvariable, hours of sleep, which measures how long a student sleeps, or if they do sleep. Kidding aside, we have the third subvariable, which is the class type of students. This determines whether the student in a class is using the synchronous or asynchronous session. This is followed by the fourth subvariable, levels of readiness, which measures the student's ability to be successful with whatever their current learning is, or simply how ready they are. Fifth subvariable we have is the type of environment a student is living in, which measures how noisy or silent the environment or area of the student is. We now have our sixth subvariable, which is the type of pressure a student experiences. This may be either family pressure, which is possibly to consistently excel, peer pressure, which is possibly the thought of keeping up and not being left behind, and time pressure, which is set by teachers depending on their tests, deadlines, or etc. Next is the seventh subvariable, which is the hours of free time a student has. In the present, I don't think students have that much time anymore. Moving on, we have the number of household chores as our eighth subvariable. Since students are studying in their homes, it is inevitable to not do any household chores, as we also need to fulfill our duties and responsibilities at home. For our ninth subvariable, we have students' number of assignments. Of course, students are given assignments by their teachers for learning purposes, but sometimes too much is a pain and too little is no gain. Next on the list, we have the temperature of the room. This 10th subvariable measures how cold, warm, or hot a room is. The number of available gadgets students have is the 11th subvariable presented. This is followed by the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, which shows how long the pandemic is going on. The second to the last subvariable is the type of internet service provider a student has. For students in the Philippines, the only available ones are PLDT, Globe, Converge, and Sky Cable. Even until now, these internet service providers still provide trouble to users regarding its Mbps. Lastly, the mental health of students is the 13th subvariable. This measures students' emotional, psychological, and social well-being.
After an extensive discussion about the subtopics under the main variable, the group has factored 6 different variables into the framework, including hours of studying, hours of sleeping, class type, levels of readiness, types of environment, and types of pressure. Test scores or exam performance is influenced by a number of factors, one of which is the hours of studying. Most people believe that the more time a student spends studying for exams outside of class, the higher their exam scores will be. But the student's well-being should also be prioritized, and having free time is an important thing to consider. Having free time allows people to choose what they want to do, who they want to spend time with, and what activities they want to participate in on their own terms. Those decisions may reflect people's life objectives and motivations, as well as happiness orientations or current moods, and these things surely have an impact on their mental health. The next variable is the hours of sleep. Poor sleep patterns among students as well as poor sleep quality can have a variety of mental and physiological consequences. This is also the point at which the room's temperature comes into play, as temperature helps to set the mood. Restlessness can affect people's overall performance, may it be academic requirements such as assignments or responsibilities at home like our household chores or errands.
So aside from the hours of sleep and the hours of studying, we all know that test scores can also be affected by the type of class being held. If it was asynchronous, students would tend to agree that it might be much more difficult to focus when you're just watching the video lectures given by the teachers. Not like when you're in a synchronous type of class, you get to listen to the lecture in real time or in live. For some, it helps much more because you can ask questions too on that particular day, so it's easier for them to answer the test. But sometimes it is different for other students since others also have their own preferences or how they would like to go about with their learning. Another thing would be the levels of readiness in terms of what gadgets you have. Is it enough? Is it functioning good enough? How about during the duration of the pandemic? Do you still have the strength to continue doing online classes? Or are you slowly giving up? Lastly, but most importantly, the type of internet service provider. This is also one of the main problems for the students as to why their test scores aren't that good. Is it stable enough? It's hard to deal with internet problems since it's something we cannot control, and that may be one of the biggest reasons as to why performance, grades, and most especially and importantly, test scores deteriorate.
For the last two variables, our group associated test scores to the type of environment a student is living in, as well as the type of pressures they experience while taking the test. The environment that our group is pertaining to would be the current environment that the students are in while being in the online learning setup. Where would these places be? Well, most of them would be at home. Can this affect the pace of which the students answer exams? Would they be able to answer fast, normal, or slow? What are the distractions that may occur while being in these environments? Animal background noise can be one for rural areas, or the city life background noise for the urban areas, or the complete opposite. Students with the privilege of having their own rooms may be able to answer in total silence. We can also take into consideration their availability of resources. Do they have access to stores that sell or repair their gadgets being used for online learning? How stable and reliable are their internet service providers? These are important factors to consider, especially if this is the setup of our online learning. Then, we can add in the variable of pressure. Let's admit it. Being at home puts a lot of pressure on us as students
because our parents are under the same roof as us, and some might even track our academic progress. Other types of pressure are also present, and it may be different for each and every one of us. To name a few that would affect test scores, it may come in the form of peer pressure, the feeling that you mustn't be behind on tasks and/or studying for the exams you will take. Lastly, we can consider the time limit of the test itself. Is the time limit fair? Or is it only fair for those who have fast internet connection? Well, eventually, all these boil down to just how much these factors affect the student's mental health. They either cause a stable or unstable effect on us. And whether we would like to admit it or not, school does play a huge role in our lives, especially when our identity is so centered on being students. The pressure of graduating on time is ticking behind our minds. We just don't like to think about it on a daily basis. But it's there. The reality is that no matter what the factor is, there will always be a significant effect on the student.
So, the question is, how will the test describe the test taker? The test will describe the test taker's understanding and application of the lessons discussed in each of their subjects during online classes. This means that if a taker had studied well and thoroughly, listened to all the discussions, attended all of the classes, it will be reflected in their results, may it be test results or their final grade. On the contrary, had they not been prepared or had crammed during the exam or prior to the exam, likewise it will appear so on the test results, and it will also appear on their final grade.
And that ends our discussion on our nomological framework. We hope you learned a few things during the whole duration of our presentation. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day ahead.